Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and thank you for joining me as we conclude today's case. This is part 2 of the Johnny Gosch disappearance. If you haven't watched part 1 of this case, I highly recommend you guys go ahead and watch part 1 first. That way everyone can have a full understanding of this case. And of course we can all be on the same page. The link for part 1 is in the description below, so if you need to go ahead and watch that first, go ahead and click out of this video. In part 1, we went over a lot of information which includes potential sightings of Johnny Gosch and some of the key evidence and factors of this case that you definitely don't want to miss. I will give a brief summary for part 1, but if you want to listen to the full details, go ahead and click out of the video and go ahead and watch part 1 now. As always, I will now add my disclaimer for this video. There will be discussions today regarding potential theories of what happened to 12-year-old Johnny Gosch. I will be talking about possible human trafficking, pedophilia, and I will be talking about sexual abuse that involves children. So if that is something you really do not want to hear about right now, please go ahead and click out of the video. There are very dark theories about this case that could be very upsetting to some. Again, if you really do not want to hear about this, take care of your mental health, and maybe I'll see you again in another video. But let's go ahead and get into the conclusion of the disappearance of Johnny Gosch. So for review, Johnny Gosch was a 12-year-old boy who lived a relatively normal life in suburban Des Moines, Iowa. On September 5th, 1982, 40 years ago, he was on his way to deliver newspapers for his neighborhood, which he did every Sunday morning for about 13 months. He did make it to the pickup location for his bundle early that Sunday morning, but shortly after a bizarre encounter with an unidentified man in a blue car, and even sightings of another man following him, he disappeared shortly after, leaving behind his red wagon full of undelivered newspapers and the family's dachshund Gretchen, who did manage to find her way back to the family's home. Johnny's parents, Noreen and John Gosch, did everything imaginable to locate their missing son, but with very little help from their local law enforcement and with them treating this case from the very beginning as a runaway case instead of a possible kidnapping, Johnny Gosch's case quickly went cold. For the next few years, tips for Johnny came in with little to no success, and then in the meantime, 2 more local boys from Des Moines, Iowa, Eugene Martin and Mark Allen, also disappeared. This sparked rumors that there could be serial kidnappers targeting young teenage boys and that there could be a massive pedophile ring taking these boys for human trafficking purposes. Although the police denied that the 3 boys that have vanished within 5 years apart, who are roughly the same age, have very similar physical features and characteristics, and even had disappeared in the same city in similar ways, they denied that they had any connection. This brings us back to the timeline where we left off at the end of part 1. So the next important event for Johnny Gosch's case occurred on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1988. Noreen Gosch went to her mailbox that morning and she opened up a typed letter that was postmarked from Idaho. The letter was claiming to be from her son, Johnny Gosch. In this letter, Johnny described that his captors dyed and cut his hair and that he now looked different. The letter also describes that Johnny had been forced to do things that disgusted him. This letter continued with Johnny asking his parents to not forget him and asking their love and forgiveness, even though he could not be allowed to come home. The letter was then concluded with, "Love your son, Johnny Gosch." But unfortunately, since this letter was typed and not handwritten, there was no possible way for the investigators to 100% confirm for certain that this letter did come from Johnny Gosch. Noreen, Johnny's mother, is very certain that this letter was from her son. She claims that she could without a doubt know by how the letter was written, the words that were used, and the way that the letter had been signed at the end with "Your son, Johnny Gosch." This was how Johnny would end all of his letters for holiday and birthday cards to his parents. Both Noreen and John verified that this is how Johnny always ended his letters. So although it can't be confirmed, in my opinion, I do believe that this letter could possibly be from Johnny as well. But again, this did spark new hope for his parents that again, Johnny is still alive somewhere. A couple more years went by without much more progress, but then by September of 1990, a breakthrough happened for this case. A sex ring victim by the name of Paul Benassi came forward, and he gave graphic details about a sex trafficking cartel that he'd been forced to be involved in as a child. During an interview with a psychiatrist, Paul described an incident of him being involved with a kidnapping of a newspaper carrier in Iowa. Paul's lawyer, whose name was John DeCamp, read the transcript of this interview, and he realized while he was reading this transcript that the date that Paul stated of this incident matched the date of Johnny Gosch's disappearance. But he wanted to be absolutely sure of this, so he verified the date of Johnny's disappearance at a local library. And he did confirm that the date that Johnny disappeared was a match with the date of Paul's story. John DeCamp then contacted the Gosch family to give them this information. This call was actually taken by Johnny's dad, John. But very interestingly, John decided not to tell Noreen about Paul and all of this information. So without telling Noreen, he visited Paul Benassi at the Lincoln Correctional Center in Nebraska. During this visit, John asked Paul, quote, "Do you know who I am?" End quote. And then Paul responded with, quote, "You look like, it can't be, the eyes, you look like Johnny Gosch," end quote. Then Paul gave his story to John, and John ended up leaving this meeting with Paul, believing his story. John then immediately hired a private investigator by the name of Roy Stevens to confirm Paul's story. This PI spent hundreds of hours interviewing Paul on tape. During these interviews, Paul would describe a man only by the name of Emilio, who made his living by abducting and selling children. He said that Emilio abducted him when he was a young teenager. He then brought him to Des Moines, Iowa to help him assist with Johnny's kidnapping. He said that the night before the kidnapping, they stayed at a local hotel in Des Moines. That night at the hotel, another man came in with a picture of a young boy, and then Emilio told Paul that this was the boy that they were going to kidnap. Then, very early that following morning, around the same time the local paper boys got up to start their route, Emilio then drove his blue car to Johnny's neighborhood with Paul in the back seat. Paul then describes that he then spotted Johnny and he started asking Johnny for directions. They then waited for Johnny to be alone. Paul then said that Emilio was the one who pulled Johnny into the car, and he instructed Paul to hold Johnny down and keep him quiet as he drove them away. Paul said that he held Johnny down and he used chloroform on him to keep him quiet. Once they successfully abducted Johnny, and warning here, this part is absolutely disgusting and disturbing, Paul says that Emilio demanded Paul at gunpoint to molest Johnny Gosch while he filmed them on tape. He then says that Johnny was transferred between two other vehicles that were also involved in the kidnapping, and they were driven by two separate men. Paul calls one man Sam and the other Tony. They then brought Johnny to a farmhouse near Sioux City, Iowa, apparently owned by a man that's only to be named as Charlie. Johnny was then kept in a locked, windowless room at this farmhouse for at least a week before being transported again out of state. From there, Johnny ended up in the state of Colorado. Despite Paul's claims with such details, the FBI and local law enforcement again did not take these claims about Johnny seriously. They claimed that Paul was not a reliable source, which at this point, just what the hell? We have a victim openly admitting to be a part of another boy's kidnapping, and the police and FBI don't even bother to go over and question Paul Benassi themselves. The only reason we have all this information is because of the private investigator that interviewed Paul for several hours. The police never bothered to look into this any further. And I feel so incredibly bad for Paul. He went through really horrifying shit throughout his life. He has suffered a lot. And to be a child and being forced to do what he did, he helped these people in this ring kidnap Johnny, and he was forced to do horrible things to him. I can't imagine the scars that Paul Benassi has, the guilt that he must have for being a part of any of this. It really is awful to think about. So Noreen did not know anything about Paul or his claims until March of 1991. Roy Stevens, the private investigator that John hired, did end up telling Noreen and showing her the tapes of his interviews with Paul. And Noreen was very shocked and very upset that her husband John did not tell her any of this. She was, quite frankly, very pissed at John for keeping all of this information from her. Eventually, John and Noreen did end up getting a divorce sometime in 1993. Once Noreen was aware of Paul's existence, she also visited him in the prison. Noreen, after talking with Paul, also believed his story of what happened to her son. According to Noreen, Paul knew things that weren't released to the public at this point, such as, for example, that Johnny had a stutter whenever he was nervous or agitated. Paul was also able to describe scars that Johnny had. He described a scar that Johnny had on his tongue, and then also a scar on his lower leg from a burn. Paul was also able to describe a birthmark that Johnny has on his chest. None of these things had been released to the public about Johnny at this time. And I do think it's impossible for him to describe these details about Johnny's physical description. You would have to be someone physically standing near this person in order to know things like that. And then what's even more compelling is that Paul also knew things about Noreen. He knew that Noreen had practiced yoga and that she used to take Johnny to work with her when he was young. And yet, again, even with all this factual information Paul is able to give, police just never followed up on him, and nor did they even attempt to investigate any of the potential leads that Paul could give to them. So Johnny, Paul, and another boy had been confirmed to be transported to Colorado, and there's proof that he was at least in the state of Colorado at some point, because by early 1991, it was discovered that in a Mexican restaurant located in Denver, Colorado, written on the bathroom wall was "Johnny Gosch was here." When Paul was questioned about this message on the bathroom wall, he was able to accurately describe the interior of this restaurant after he was given a photo of only the outside of this restaurant. He then stated that he remembers Johnny writing this on the wall. He explained that him, Johnny, and another boy were painting their nails with red nail polish, and he remembers that when Johnny went into this bathroom, he then wrote the message on the wall with the red nail polish, and it was confirmed that this message was indeed written with red nail polish. So let me go ahead and stop for a minute. So at this point, Paul has to be telling the truth, because otherwise, how could he known of all of this information? How could he accurately describe so many details, not only of the night before Johnny's kidnapping and details of the kidnapping itself, but also with this restaurant? There's just no way on earth that this man was able to make all of this up. He was not told that it was written in red nail polish. He was the one that told them that, and they verified it. How could he have known that if he had not been there himself? Then, in November of 1992, Johnny Gosch's case was featured on America's Most Wanted. And then, during this episode, Paul made an appearance, and he was actually taken to one of the houses that him and Johnny were kept in while they were in Colorado. I can't picture all the emotions Paul was feeling in that moment. I have been able to see brief clips of him breaking down at this house, and it's so incredibly sad to watch because all of the memories of what happened to him and Johnny while they were there just came flooding back. It's very emotional because Paul's reaction is just very heartbreaking. Despite Paul giving all of this information, it honestly didn't seem to have led anyone anywhere near to Johnny Gosch, as again, police and FBI refused to believe in all of Paul Bonassi's claims, continuously deeming him as unreliable because he was a man that was in prison and he did suffer from several mental issues, most likely a lot of them due to his years of abuse. He actually had dissociative identity disorder, DID, which is also known as multiple personality disorder. And I also read that he also suffers from PTSD, or also known as post-traumatic stress disorder. But in my opinion, the investigators at this point, they're just giving yet another dumbass excuse to not be involved in Johnny Gosch's case. This is honestly, truly one of the most frustrating cases to read and listen to because of how shitty, I've said this a million times, how shitty these investigators are with this case. So more and more years go by without much more progress with Johnny's case. Then one day, Noreen shocks everybody. She was testifying in some trial, and she shocked everyone by revealing under oath during her questioning she was asked if she had ever seen Johnny after he disappeared, and she responded with yes. She explained that a few years prior that her son Johnny actually came and visited her. Noreen says that it was March of the year 1997. It was late at night, around 2:30 in the morning, when she heard a persistent knocking at her door. She was able to see a man through the peephole of the door. She immediately asked, "Who is it?" And this man responded with, "It's me, Mom, Johnny." Noreen says that there was another man with Johnny that she didn't know. She says that Johnny's hair was straightened and dyed jet black. He had grown out his hair, and the length of his hair came to his shoulders. She said he was wearing a coat over a t-shirt and some jeans. At this point in time, in March of 1997, Johnny would have been 27 years old. Noreen says that the two of them talked for about a couple of hours. Noreen says that despite his dyed hair, she was able to recognize him, and he even confirmed his identity by showing her the birthmark on his chest. During their conversation, Noreen says that Johnny did not describe much about his current adult life, but he did confirm to Noreen that Paul's story and everything that he told her was the truth. He told his mother, Noreen, that he had been in fact kidnapped and taken into an underground pedophile sex trafficking organization. And when he was deemed too old to be of use, which that really just makes me sick to think about, but when he was too old, they just threw him into the streets with nothing. He said he didn't have anywhere to go, and he was scared that they would try to come back for him at some point. So he began to live under a new identity. He told Noreen that it was not safe for him to return because he still feared for his own life and for his family's lives as well. He also told her not to tell anyone of his meeting with her either. And Noreen has received quite a bit of backlash from her telling this story. A lot of people seem to believe that this didn't happen because Noreen took a long time, years, to tell the public that Johnny had visited her. And I really don't understand that reasoning, to be honest, because Johnny himself told her that he was in danger and that him returning would be putting himself in danger, her in danger, their family in danger. And if your child is telling you that they are not safe, why would she put her son in more danger? Why would she put her own family in jeopardy? And with how shitty the FBI and the police have been to her and her family, why the hell would she tell them this information? So again, this is my opinion, but when I think about it, it makes sense for her to have kept it quiet. And by the time she did reveal this information, it had been years, so maybe she felt like it was safe to let people know. But John, Johnny's father, who at this point was Noreen's ex-husband, interestingly, he publicly announced that he was not sure that Noreen's story was real. So it's as if he didn't even believe her for some reason. I don't know if Noreen told John about this prior or if he found out the same day everybody else did, but obviously at this point Noreen and John were not in a good place. Then in the year of 2000, Noreen did end up publishing her own book about her experience and her research regarding her son's case, and it's titled Why Johnny Can't Come Home. Her book details aspects of human trafficking and describes the real dangers and the reality of pedophile rings in the world. Noreen wants people to be educated regarding this issue, and that it does happen, not just in the United States, but everywhere. And it shocks me of how many people seem to think that pedophile rings and human trafficking are only conspiracy theories. But Noreen's book explains that it is a very real and a very horrifying and serious issue worldwide. It's not a fairy tale. It's not a TV or movie plot. This is real life, and it's absolutely terrifying. On September 1st, 2006, an unknown person left a stack of photos by Noreen's door. These photos included disturbing images. One of them was a man that appeared to be dead with something around his throat. There were photos of several young boys tied up and gagged. And one of these photos did stand out to Noreen. It was a photo of a young boy appearing to be around the age of 12 years old. He was tied up, gagged, and he had possibly been branded on his shoulder. Noreen believes this photo is of her son Johnny. I am not going to include this photo in the video, as whether it's real or it's fake, it's still incredibly disturbing, and I'm not going to show a graphic photo of children being tied up and gagged. This photo is available with a quick Google search, so if you guys do want to look into this photo and see it, it can very easily be found. This photo has not been confirmed to be of Johnny. It's debatable. This photo is pretty blurry. It's hard to make out. There does seem to be a little bit of a shadowed spot on the boy's chest, which Noreen believes is Johnny's birthmark, but honestly, I really don't know if this is a legitimate photo of him. A big part of me wants to believe that it's fake or it's just some boy playing around simply because no one wants to see a child in that type of situation. But I do have to admit, it's possible that this could be Johnny. Since these photos were left at Noreen's doorstep, there doesn't seem to be any more prominent case developments. Tips have continued to come in throughout the years, but nothing major has come out about this case in years at this point. Johnny Gosch, along with possible connected disappearance cases of Eugene Martin and Mark Allen, are still ongoing. Johnny would be 52 years old today, as of the day I am recording this. And it is possible that he is still alive, and he could be having a completely different life. He could be using a fake name still. He could be wearing some sort of disguise. He could be still dyeing his hair, or he could have shaved his head. He could have done anything at this point to himself to make himself unrecognizable. He could have lived a full life. He could be married. He could have kids, and maybe he could even have some grandkids at this point. But most importantly, I believe he can still be found. And all of these boys could still be out there and just too afraid to come forward. Let's talk about a couple of theories for this case. The first big theory is, of course, there are police investigators, FBI agents, and possibly even high-ranked government officials that are involved with not only Johnny's disappearance, but with the disappearance of many children that have been kidnapped for human trafficking purposes. I have read so many comments from people in general believing in this theory, and honestly, it makes perfect sense when you sit down and really think about it. These rings seem to be very well connected, and specifically in Johnny's case, it seems to have been explicitly planned down to the last detail. And if you do believe in Paul Bonassi's claims, there's no doubt in my mind that Johnny Gosch's kidnapping was obviously well planned. Many people were involved with his kidnapping. Everything was just executed in such a perfect way. They made sure that the timing of his kidnapping was perfect. They waited for him to be alone when no one was watching. So why would it be so hard to believe that police weren't involved in this? And on top of the perfect planning of his kidnapping, every opportunity the police had to delay any progress on this case, they took it without hesitation. It feels like to me they were stalling for time. When his parents first initially reported him missing, they shrugged it off and kept insisting that this wasn't some sort of abduction or kidnapping, but it was just a boy who ran away. They didn't put up missing persons posters. They wouldn't listen to any of the witnesses, and they wouldn't listen to Noreen, who supplied them with all of these details. They didn't bother to look at really any tips that frequently came into this case, or at least, again, that's what it seems. They had this description of this blue car that multiple people saw that may have taken Johnny, but they didn't release any of that information for the public to keep an eye out for this car. But the most shocking thing to me is that they have not investigated Paul Bonassi's claims. Even after all these years, I don't think they've ever spoken to Paul. If they have, they haven't released anything of it, or they just turn a blind eye on anything he said. This private investigator, Roy, he had so many interview tapes, and they took it upon themselves to investigate and confirmed a lot of what he said to be true. And it makes no sense for them to this day not to go find Paul and investigate all of his claims. So yes, in my opinion, I do think it's true that there are investigators, there are some FBI agents, and there's high-end government officials that are involved with rings or this superior ring. It just seems like they're covering up Johnny's case. And they're covering it up to the point where it's blatantly obvious. Either someone within them is involved, or the only other possible explanation is that they just truly don't give a shit about Johnny Gosch. Those are the only two possible scenarios in my mind. But what's even a more crazy theory is that Johnny's father, John Gosch Sr., could be involved with the abduction of his own son also. And I do admit, John Sr. has made some questionable decisions, starting with him deciding to go ahead and deliver the newspapers that were left abandoned before he went and contacted police that his son was gone. Could it be that he was also stalling for more time so that the perpetrators that took Johnny could get farther away? It's possible. Anything is possible with this case. But not only that, he and Noreen just always seemed to be on different pages throughout the progress of this case. Noreen was so gung-ho about writing down everything, making sure every possible tip, lead was searched thoroughly. John, on the other hand, he at times wanted to disregard tips. And the fact that he didn't tell Noreen when Paul Bonassi came into the picture at all, and in fact he deliberately kept all that information regarding Paul's existence and his claims away from Noreen. It took Noreen several months for her to find out about this man and how he could potentially know exactly what happened to her son. He seems to be the only person that has spoken out that knows what happened to Johnny from day one in the following weeks of Johnny Gosch's kidnapping. I have seen articles where John says that the reason he kept this information from Noreen was to protect her. But I don't know what that means, really. Protect her from what? Noreen wants to listen to every tip about her son. She wants to find him, and she's willing to listen to whatever anyone has to say. And Paul, to this day, seems to be the best lead possible for them to find him. And maybe I could understand the initial hesitation of him telling her. Maybe he didn't want to get her hopes up. I could understand him just wanting to go up there, visit Paul in prison first, before he told Noreen that a man has come forward about their son. But I don't see why, after the point where he went to Nebraska and he talked to Paul, and he said he believed his story from that initial first meeting with him, I just don't understand why, after that point, he continued to keep this information away from Noreen. It's very strange. But what's most compelling to me about this theory that John could be involved is that apparently Paul Benassi was asked in one of his interviews how him and Emilio and the other men involved knew that Johnny Gosch would be alone that morning. And Paul stated that John Gosch Sr. had been contacted in the middle of the night the day of his disappearance. And he said he helped arrange to make sure that Johnny would be alone that morning. And that's why John, who always went with Johnny during his paper route, didn't go with him that morning. Which, that's just insane. And so far, everything Paul has said has turned out to be true. So that really, honestly, just makes me think that he is telling the truth about this as well. And it's very hard to comprehend that his father may have been involved with this ring that took Johnny. But let's be honest. If he did help and arrange his son's own kidnapping, he's not the first parent to sell their own child, and he's not the last. Some parents, if we should even call them parents, they have done horrible and unimaginable things to their own children. So I honestly can't rule out the possibility that John may have been a part of the abduction of Johnny. He could be a long-time person involved with this pedophile ring too, who knows? Maybe Noreen has had her suspicions about her ex-husband as well. They never appear together at all anymore, and to my knowledge, Noreen doesn't seem like she's speaking to him. But seriously, Paul saying that John was involved after everything else he's told has been true. Why would he lie about this specific detail? He has no motive for it. He's been honest and genuine with everything he's told during these interviews. From the day of Johnny's abduction to them being kept at this farmhouse, and then the story about Johnny writing a message at this random Mexican restaurant on the bathroom wall. Everything seems to be pointing that he is telling the truth. And so maybe his claims that John had been a part of this is also the truth too. The last theory that I did want to talk about is pretty far-fetched. I do not personally believe in this theory, and honestly, I don't see any recent articles about this theory since dated 2005 or 2006. So the theory has definitely died down at this point, but it's still pretty interesting, so I did want to go ahead and talk about it. Some people believe, or they did believe around this time in 2005, 2006, that this man by the name of Jeff Gannon, whose real name is confirmed to be James Guckert, may be really Johnny Gosch. Jeff Gannon is a media figure, and between the years of 2003 and 2005, he was given credentials as a White House reporter. He interviewed former President George W. Bush. He regularly attended White House press briefings. So this man was in the media quite a bit. He did a lot of on-camera interviews, so people knew his face. So a lot of people seem to believe that first, he potentially looks like Johnny. I honestly don't really think so. I can see maybe minor, basic similarities, but nothing about Jeff Gannon's looks are identical to how Johnny Gosch looks, in my opinion. There are a ton of age progression pictures of Johnny at this point out there today. These progression photos are a lot more advanced, and I think they do a really good job with progression ages at this point. I think they are pretty close to accurate, and when you compare the progression photos of Johnny, They do not look anything like Jeff Gannon. He was also born a lot earlier than Johnny Gosch. He was born in the year 1957, making him 65 years old at this point, and Johnny Gosch again, and he would be 53 in November of this year, 2022. I think why this theory came up was because it was found that his name, Jeff Gannon, was a fake name. And then when people found out that he was using this fake name, that's when all these possible connections started. And don't get me wrong, it's a very interesting theory, but there's really not a lot of evidence supporting it. Noreen, last time she spoke about this theory, years ago, she stated that she would like for Jeff Gannon to do a DNA test done, and that she didn't rule out the possibility that he could be her son. She seemed to have thought he could look like him. But as far as I can tell during the research of this case, Jeff Gannon has not done this DNA test. And this theory kind of reminds me of the well-known conspiracy theory that JonBenet Ramsey, of course the little girl that had been murdered, whose case is also unsolved, and superstar singer Katy Perry are the same person. And that's another theory I definitely don't believe. I would just need more evidence. Just because people look alike, that doesn't mean they're the same person. And again, I don't think Jeff Gannon looks that much like Johnny Gosch, to be honest. I just keep staring at both of their pictures, and I do not see a big resemblance at all. Jeff Gannon hasn't been in the media as much in recent years. I did find a clip that I will add now regarding his response to these Johnny Gosch rumors. It's of Jeff and a reporter questioning him about it. Take a look at this.
One question for you. Let's get right to the point. Are you willing to take a DNA test and settle the controversy once and for all? Yes or no?
Absolutely, I would definitely take a DNA test, but that isn't even necessary because there's so much evidence available to disprove these accusations.
That's a yes, then.
Well, he's saying yes. My friend Jeff is saying yes.
As a lawyer, I can smell a
No.
hitch.
You got to understand something. My friend here, Jeff, who's come on our show today, didn't do anybody else's show. He's going to tell us the facts. Jeff, how old are you, first off?
I'm 48 years old.
48 years old. My man Johnny Gosch there would be 35 years old. Lisa,
why
the
are you
numbers.
Avoiding the question?
No. He just said, hey, Jeff, you said you would take a DNA. I could set this whole thing up, but let's get to the point. The point is, by giving a DNA sample, there could be opening up some other avenues of things that I kind of know that you possibly could be involved, and I don't knock it. Again, if you want to go suck on a Johnny Pump or whatever you want to do, you could do in this world. But the point is, all we're here for is to show that my friend Jeff is not Johnny Gosch. Jeff?
There are dozens of people who have known me most of my life that could definitely vouch for the fact that I am not this person. Look, what happened to this child and the suffering that his mother has endured is a tragedy. But it's also been very difficult for me and my family, my real mother and members of my family who have had to listen to these fabrications being spread in newspapers, on television, and on the internet.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a question, not Bo. Jeff, are you willing to take a DNA test, yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes. When I cut my finger yesterday, there was plenty of DNA available. You should have stopped by.
What else you want, Lisa?
Are you his lawyer?
No, excuse me. He's my friend Jeff down there. Jeff, thank you for coming on the show.
So Jeff denies the claims, of course. He states that he was willing to take a DNA test to prove it, but he just thinks it's unnecessary. He points out his age difference. He points out that there are many people that have known him throughout his life that could also confirm he is Johnny Gosch. The female reporter questioning him, she seems like she believes in this theory. She questions Jeff pretty hard on it. But I really just don't think he's Johnny. Well, my question is, let's say that he is Johnny. Why would Johnny be this media personnel? If you believe that he did visit Noreen one night and told her that it was too dangerous for him to return, why would he intentionally put himself in media light? It doesn't make any sense. If Johnny Gosch is still alive and out there somewhere, I think he's hidden himself away from the world. I think he's keeping to himself, keeping a very low profile. He obviously isn't using his real name. He has to have some sort of a fake identity. I don't believe Johnny would risk putting himself or his family in any danger whatsoever. I don't think he would risk it. Johnny knows what this ring that took him is capable of. He is not going to draw any type of attention himself if he can help it. So that's really all the information I have regarding Johnny Gosch's case. I know this one was a long one. Thank you all so much for sticking with me in both parts 1 and 2 of this case. Johnny Gosch's case is crazy. It's a very interesting one. That's why there are so many videos and theories for this case. Everyone wants to know what happened to Johnny Gosch. I really hope that Johnny is still alive and out there somewhere. And I really hope that he's living the best life that he can. One day I hope that he will come back and come forward, especially for his mother Noreen. I will always hope that at the very least he will someday reach back out to her. And maybe he has. Maybe she just hasn't told anyone again. She deserves every single question answered about her son and what happened to him. She has done so many great things. And if any one of us gets to have answers about Johnny, I want it to be her. I want his family to have closure. I want them to have justice for Johnny. I want the people who kidnapped and abducted him, I want them all to burn in hell. What I personally take away from this case, if I've learned anything, is to always be on guard. You never know if the people around you are plotting against you. And that's the sad reality. Johnny was abducted, and I believe his abduction was planned. Everything was set up in a way that this group of people that took Johnny would be successful. And they got away with taking this boy. And I'm sure they got away with taking other children. And they probably got away with taking Eugene Martin and Mark Allen as well. Pedophile rings are real, and they are dangerous. And even though 40 years has now passed since Johnny Gosch's abduction, this ring could, and it probably is, still in existence to this day. So please protect your children, protect yourselves. This is a scary and a sick world that we live in. I hate to admit it, but it's the truth, and I want everyone to be aware of it. So please subscribe to the channel, like and share these videos if possible. Comment down below what you think about this case, and if you have any of your own theories, please share them as well. I read all comments, and I would love to see more theories. Until next time, I will see you guys in my next video in case number 7. Bye everyone.